Thank you, everyone. Thank you for putting up with this bizarre situation. And for the folks that I took the liberty of introducing you for yourselves, I hope that I did it justice. And please do as Alan has just done if you are in a place where you can write chats and let us know more about yourselves in your own voice. For now, let's move into the main portion of the webinar. Today, the topic of the webinar is climate spaces. It sounds, I mean, we already know from what you've all shared with us already that many of us are operating in different climate-related spaces. We're going to define climate spaces as any arena of social interaction where decisions are being made or information is being exchanged that's related to the impacts of climate change or actions taken to address the root causes of climate change. We're going to hear today from two Alaska-based commercial fishermen, Linda Behnken and Hannah Heimbuch, who recently entered some pretty high-level climate spaces. Linda is the executive director of the Alaska Longline Fishermen's Association and has fished commercially off Alaska since 1982. She's served on many different fisheries panels, including the North Pacific Fisheries Management Council, the International Pacific Halibut Commission, and Alaska's Climate Action Leadership Team. She earned the National Fisherman Highliner Award in 2009 for her work promoting healthy marine ecosystems, and the White House Champion of Change Award for Sustainable Seafood by President Obama in 2016. And Linda was recently one of the co-authors of the Alaska chapter of the U.S. National Climate Assessment, and she's going to let us know what that experience was like. After that, we're going to hear from Hannah Heimbuch, who's a commercial fisherman and writer from Alaska. Hannah works as a fishery policy and communications consultant for Ocean Strategies and is a regular participant in North Pacific fisheries management processes. Hannah also serves as the co-chair of the Alaska Fishing Communities Coalition and the executive director of the Under 60 Cod Harvesters. She's fished commercially from Bristol Bay to Prince William Sound and currently fishes seasonally on Kodiak Island, where she and her partner run a remote salmon fishing operation. So the first question I would like to ask each of our panelists to reflect on is to let us know, to sort of describe the climate space that you recently participated in. As I mentioned for Linda, that was being a co-author on the Alaska chapter of the National Climate Assessment. And for Hannah, I forgot to mention, so let me say this now. Hannah recently returned in December from an expedition to Dubai, where she got a chance to participate in the events surrounding the UNFCCC, the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change Conference of the Parties that took place there. The question is to let us know about the climate space you recently participated in, why these spaces were significant nationally or globally, and as a fisherman, why did you feel it was important for you to be in these climate spaces? And Linda, you're up first.
So could I share my screen and just tell people first a little bit about, okay. All right, hopefully you all can see that. When I got asked to be on part of the National Climate Assessment, I have to admit I had heard of it, but didn't really know what it was. So I thought that might be true of some other people, and I thought I would just quickly give you an introduction to what it is. So just sort of mandate, the scope and mandate is quite large. It was established by Congress to understand, assess, predict, and respond to both human and natural induced climate change, to report back every 4 years on that to the president, and to integrate, evaluate, to describe what the uncertainties are by bringing together a panel of experts to do that. And one of the parts that was hardest for us is that you can't prescribe, like, this is what should happen or this is what you should do. It has to be very much about what's happening. What is our confidence about when we say what is happening, and you know where that might go in the future, but without saying what should be done to mitigate those impacts. And that was a line that we were always challenged to walk. There's a lot of opportunity for public engagement, although it's difficult to get people to understand this is going on and know how to engage. We worked hard at that. And I can vouch for the fact that there's a very extensive review process. This is the table of contents, so there's some sort of specific areas of focus. There's also regions, and Alaska gets to count as its own region. We had our own chapter, and I was asked to be a co-author on that chapter. And from my understanding, it's the first time there was a fisherman serving as a co-author. We really tried to emphasize how climate change is affecting people, since we thought that might drive the message home more to people, to also identify that there are all these other stressors that's happening sort of concurrent with climate change. So sometimes it's hard to tease out what's climate change and what's other aspects that are being exacerbated by climate change. And that really that it's here in Alaska happening now. These are the key messages from our chapter. We struggled often to come up with the language that really reflected what people were seeing without going beyond into that space that we were not supposed to get into, but also could drive those messages home. And I was particularly involved with the section on livelihoods. Just to give you a taste of some of what's in the chapter, we tried to really make sure people understood that climate change is not something in the future. Alaskans are starting to recognize that, but it's really happening in the here and now. For us, that we're seeing, say, changes in the extent of sea ice, trying to demonstrate to people where we've had drought, Southeast Alaska, where, it's rainforest, we're not supposed to have drought, just some of these changes that have already been observed that are clearly part of climate change. And then in terms of ecological changes, what effect those changes that we've seen in the climate processes have had on our salmon, on our moose. You can see how far they're moving north. And then to also point out where some of the information has come from that identify these changes. The one I would point to is trumpeter swans came from the Leo network, which is a sort of citizen science network of people reporting that trumpeter swans were starting to overwinter in Southeast Alaska, to show up at different times. Just lots of different ways this information is gathered and reflects what those changes are. And then salmon being such a big issue, of course, for me, but for Alaska generally, where we're seeing these changes where they're directly tied to climate change, but sometimes where they're exacerbating other changes, or there's regulations in place that make adaptation to those changes really difficult. Like fishermen can't just move with a fish, their permits are specific to a certain area. And regulations prevent the kind of flexibility that might have been available in the past. This slide was this section looking at subsistence, but also at how all other livelihoods and employment in Alaska is being affected by climate change, and that it's having far-reaching impacts on security in a lot of different ways for people. So food security, economic security, and just the severity of some of those impacts. We talked a lot about adaptation, mitigation, and what some of the barriers are in our state to mitigation. I think they're really represented across the nation of how often there are silos where people in communities have certain needs. There's all different agencies that are part of addressing those needs. It's hard to know who to go to, and often those different agencies are not working together, and that how breaking down some of those barriers is going to be really important to adaptation. But also that it's really important where we do see successes and people being successful with adapting or mitigating some of the impacts, that we share those stories and help people to understand what's working. Stories is a place where we see a really important way to try and connect people to what's happening in a way that starts to resonate. So we included short stories throughout our Alaska chapter that were gathered by different members of our team, sometime from media, sometime from going directly to people who could relate a climate change story in their own words of how it's affecting their family, themselves, their community. So big team of people, most of them academics, all of them with a whole lot more credentials. It certainly felt like to me to be working in this space. But I can say in answer to Sarah's question, I always felt like my input was sought and it was respected. It was an incredibly fun and inspiring group of people to work with. Our chair did an outstanding job of respecting how busy everybody is, and that this was an added job for people on top of their regular day job, but also keeping us moving and keeping us on task, and making sure he was checking in with everybody to get that feedback that that he was looking for, so he could move it ahead to the reviewers. This is where you can find the full NCA 2023 report, and from there you can navigate to any topic of interest to you within that chapter. So I will stop sharing my screen and turn it over to Hannah.
Thanks, Linda. I feel like Linda has gotten into like the nitty-gritty detail of climate work, and I'm going to pull way back and be an observer in a different kind of space. So what I did in December is I attended the United Nations Conference of the Parties on Climate. It's nicknamed COP. This was COP 28. So they've held 28 of these international conversations around climate change. And it brings together governments, NGOs, industry, activists to talk about mitigating and adapting to the impacts of climate change, right? And all of the many topics that swirl around that. So I was just kind of learning about this event. And it sounds like it's changed dramatically over the years. I think 15 or so years ago, when it was still developing, there was a couple thousand people that attended these things. This event drew 100,000 people. I think you could probably make some observations about the climate utility of flying 100,000 people halfway around the world to talk about climate. But that's like that's a whole other conversation. So I was asked to go by the Walton Foundation as part of an effort to insert small scale fishermen into some of these larger conversations, recognizing that that's not happening right now. So my job, and then the guy I also went with, whose name is Pak Mustaine, he is a blue crab fisherman from Indonesia who also works with the Walton Foundation on different sustainable fisheries work there. Our whole job was just to show up and talk to people about the importance of small scale fisheries within climate justice, within climate resilience, food security in a climate changing world, what our vulnerabilities are, and really do kind of basic education about the importance of that. So it was kind of a broad mission, but I feel like I really was able to observe while we were there why that was so important. And it really seems like the large scale climate discussions around oceans and around food are, for the most part, happening without a discussion about fish and fishermen and seafood as part of not just things that we need to protect in a climate changing world, but part of the solution, including having local food systems and reliable small scale harvesting opportunities, all that kind of stuff. So we told stories like 40% of the world's population, proximity to the coast, 3 billion people on our planet depend on seafood as a primary source of nutrition, really providing kind of that basic education. And then observing and bringing back for ourselves, like, what's the cost of not having fishermen in these conversations? And I was observing conversations around carbon sequestration, sequestration in the ocean, around preserving biodiversity, around energy development on the ocean. And these are all really big, impactful conversations that we're aware of, but they, again, largely happen without the input of the fisheries and fishing communities that they're most likely to impact. So, we need clean energy, we need biodiversity in the ocean, but if the conversation happens without fishermen, we end up with monuments and wind farms that don't make space for us to operate and provide food for our communities and livelihoods in coastal spaces. Um, so I am really glad that they chose to insert some fishermen into these conversations, and I really definitely see the need for, especially folks that are tied to fishing communities, these place-based communities, to figure out how we can show up there and insert ourselves into conversations about food security, I think is really critical, and community resilience, because that's not happening now. And most of the food conversations I observed were agriculture, and where there was a fish element, it was largely aquaculture, which I think there's a place for healthy, responsible aquaculture. Largely I like the Alaska model of seaweed and oysters and shellfish, but there needs to be a strong and clear wild fish component there. So I could probably go on and on about that, but it was a huge conversation, and I feel like even though I walked 8 miles a day for 5 days and didn't even scratch the surface of the scale of this event, but feel like I saw that we need a presence there, because these conversations are of global impact, and there are billions of people around the world relying on it happening in a way that doesn't hurt seafood-based systems. So, yeah, that's my spiel.
I have a couple of other questions that I want to feed to the panelists before we take questions and answers, if that's all right, Eric. But I just would like to ask, Hannah mentioned the importance of, people like all of us who care about the climate and have fisheries experience, to start entering these spaces and to figure out how to leverage them to advance the causes that we care about. And I'm wondering, if both of you could speak to sort of how we can get more fishermen into spaces like these. What ways do fishermen have to prepare themselves to be effective in spaces like this? And how do we have to ask these spaces to sort of enable us to be effective? We can start with Linda again.
I think it is really important to get more fishermen in, and I think often the barrier is the expense of getting to these events and participating in these events, participating in the multiple forums where your livelihood is at risk. But one thing I would say is once you find your way there, I always find, there's probably an exception, but for the most part, I always find that the scientists are really eager to hear from people who are on the water and are seeing firsthand what's changing on the water, that you do meet with a welcome. Sometimes there's a little pushback from the environmental community about talking about, instead of marine protected areas, we want you to think about maintaining livelihoods. That Hannah was talking about. I see a shift in a positive direction on that, where there's more and more of the NGOs that are recognizing that durable conservation means you have to work with stakeholders and you have to maintain local economies, while also protecting biodiversity and maintaining ocean health. So, I think people are prepared, I guess, is mostly what I would say, to be part of that space. They'll find they're generally welcomed, but it's difficult to afford the time and the expense of participating.
I would agree with all of that. And then add, I guess, some of the strategies I've been thinking about just inserting ourselves into these conversations is not allowing fish and seafood and fishing communities to be put kind of as a side topic. I feel like it's often treated as like a niche idea that people listen to patiently, but don't necessarily integrate philosophically into some of the other big picture things. And I think we need to come to people and say, you know, I have a health topic to talk to you about. I have a community wellness topic. I have an education topic. I have a food security topic, and it's about fish. And really, you know, push to make that part of the mainstream discussion through different angles. Like I feel like anytime I try to fundraise around something or raise voices around something, it's usually so hyper focused on fish and seafood, and that's where my perspective is. But it's really hard to sometimes bring people into that dialogue that fish is not the first thing they think about when they wake up in the morning. But sometimes community health is, or education is, and any variety of other topics that we can enter into. So that's one of the things that I'm working on doing.
Well, my last question for the two of you is, what other climate spaces are you currently in or expecting to enter soon? Can you give us a heads up on those?
Well, we are working in decarbonizing our own industry to try and move towards hybrid boats and eventually to hopefully zero emission boats. And that we have some funding from the Department of Energy. So just to sort of get the Department of Energy on people's radar, we're doing this climate resilience assessment that I spoke to and introducing Natalie. That's a partnership with NOAA. So that's another, you know, forum where we see opportunity to get communities to be thinking more about how climate is impacting their fisheries and starting to better incorporate communities into, or sorry, how climate's affecting the communities in fishing communities and to incorporate that more into their planning. There's a big climate workshop coming up in the North Pacific in June, the 4th and 5th of June, where our Science and Statistical Committee and more will be looking at how climate is affecting fisheries and whether we're doing an adequate job of responding to that with stock assessment and fisheries management. So I will be involved in that gathering. Anyway, yeah, there's probably more not coming to the top of my mind. Oh, one more. So I am part of a recently launched national panel that's also under NOAA on area-based conservation management to address biodiversity loss and climate change. And look forward to seeing what more we can do with that panel to move again from the marine protected area thinking to marine conservation, defined much more broadly by the America the Beautiful initiative, and I think a more inclusive way, durable way of thinking.
For me, I continue to be really focused on adaptive management in response to climate, really working with councils, with NOAA and NEMS, with our federal fisheries laws to look at what does dynamic management that responds to significant change look like actually putting teeth to climate resilient fisheries, to ecosystem-based fisheries management. I don't think we have figured out how to put that into action. And so I feel like a multi-decade mission of mine will be to, like most, if not everybody here, to continue to be committed to that. I'm also really interested in the climate and equity space. Are some of our most vulnerable communities that have been our most vulnerable communities for a long time are increasingly vulnerable in climate change, especially as we look at regulation to reinforce fisheries. I think who gets to be at that table and who gets protected and reinforcement, it really depends on who has the resources to show up and advocate for themselves. So I'm really interested in a just climate transition and how we can all participate in that. And then, as Sarah said, I most recently have joined the board of Seafood Harvesters of America. It's a national commercial fishing organization. I'm really interested in how groups like that can bring together diverse stakeholders that don't always see eye to eye to be leaders on things like climate. Not just responding to changes that we're seeing or asking for assistance or trying not to be harmed by fast moving solutions, but to be leaders and proactive in saying, this is what's going to work for us and for the problems that we're trying to tackle. And we have a vested interest in it. And we're critical ambassadors for the ecosystems that we are all reliant on and care about. So that's kind of my personal mission in joining some of the national discussions, is to establish leadership, possibly in a new manner.
Well, thank you so much, Hannah and Linda. I am so inspired by what you're doing and so proud that we as an industry had a representative both in a chapter of the National Climate Assessment and at the UN Climate Summit. So just really wonderful to hear more about those stories and what it felt like to be in those spaces. Kinsey, would you like to lead us in a question and answer / discussion?
Yeah, if you folks don't mind just using the raise hand feature or turning on your video if you're on your phone, and we can ask these folks some questions. Go ahead, Richard.
I've been thinking in terms of people bantering around about climate and environmental equality, and how fishermen don't fit into these little niches that we normally think of. In Maine, in Maine we think of native populations or people of color or poverty, certain levels of poverty and things like that. And the fishermen in Maine, we're not poor people, but and we don't fit into those things, but we are small communities at risk, And how do we get ourselves into that sort of conversations of climate equality and environmental things and those sort of legal aspects that people are dealing with without, people look at you funny because, you're not poor people, you're not this, but we are at risk, and these communities are solely dependent on things that are really connected to the climate and to all these things that are happening. So how do we enter that conversation?
Well, I'm happy to start and then let Hannah add to what I say, but I think that's a great question, Richard. And I would just say it's just really important to keep showing up at all those meetings. I think there is growing recognition that the economic drivers of a community are essential to conservation, that you need to maintain a healthy community-based economy to be able to have the wherewithal to address climate change, to continue to manage resources in a way that's sustainable. So there's lots of different voices that need to be part of durable conservation initiatives into the future. There's recognition that small-scale community-based fisheries and the culture that is community-based fisheries is part of that solution and needs to be at the table. If you go to the Executive Order 14008, the America the Beautiful initiative, of course, it talks about social equity, underserved communities, indigenous, BIPOC, but it also talks about local economies. And that's where you come into the equation, even if you don't check any of the other boxes. And that aspect of addressing climate change and identifying durable solutions is extremely important. And I think you need to recognize that importance and continue to speak to that.
I think that was a great answer. I won't add too much because I totally agree with that. Vulnerable communities come in many different forms, and I think it's about articulating what about your community is vulnerable in those situations and asserting a place at the table. I know one of the things that has been helpful to me in Alaska has been looking at some of the ways a fishing business, a small fishing business, supports a community that's sometimes undocumented. All of the different types of businesses that it supports, the subsistence that it supports by having a piece of infrastructure that's able to bring food to a community, I think that's valuable. Just a lot of different things that it's just not contained in X vessel prices and numbers of jobs necessarily, but all the ways we can communicate value. And I think you're exactly right, Richard, that those communities matter as well.
Yeah, and that was what Hannah said really triggered something for me. One of the things when we were working on our Alaska chapter, we kept coming back to was the importance of fish in food security and in human health. And I think that's also true across, certainly in Maine, but in coastal economies around our country. And that is a place, it's an entry point. It's the economics, it's food security, it's health, it's culture. All of that is part of who we are as commercial fishermen.
Thank you. Eric, you're next. Go ahead.
Well, first of all, I want to just say I am so impressed. And of course, I've worked with Linda for decades, and I know what a great person she is. And Hannah, I've read and interacted just a bit. Hannah, I am so impressed. I've been taking notes as fast as my old fingers will write. There's a couple things I want to say, but mostly just I wanted to reinforce what's happening here. I'm just learning so much. But what I told Senator Dan Sullivan and other people have told me right on, Eric, is the most endangered species in Alaska right now is young, small boat commercial fishermen. And that we need to recognize that we need to help them adapt. I heard the comments on climate adaptation, and we need to figure out, because there's definite winners out here and losers. For example, young blackcod and herring seem to be just doing tremendously well in our new ecosystems. But king salmon, for example, are really struggling. Macrocystis kelp is doing really well. And there are markets for roe on kelp in open pounds where we don't kill the herring. But we need to figure out, instead of big players and corporate interests getting into that emerging market, how to get the young fishermen, longliners, gill netters, trollers that are being displaced, in how we get them into those fisheries. The other thing, and this is important, how do we get these fishermen at the table, these young fishermen? Offer them honorariums. That has started to emerge. The first time I saw that was with our sea lion ladies. They wanted people to participate. And it has, getting an honorarium to get these young people out to hear their important perspectives. And Linda just had a thing. I didn't realize we'd get an honorarium. It really matters. Not so much to me, this old guy who can retire, but to get these young people out. Tell them their comments are worth something and we're going to reimburse them for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. I think Alex was next.
Oh, hey there. Hopefully I'm getting through on you guys now. I'm up here on Cape Cod, at the end of Cape Cod in Massachusetts, in a town called Provincetown. And it used to be, the fishermen definitely and the families outnumbered a lot of the people here, but through, I think they call it gentrification and whatever that's happened since the 90s, plus the regulations and all that, a lot of the folks have moved out of here, and we have now a lot of starter castles and McMansions. We lost the infrastructures basically for offloading. It's like a domino effect. And what's happened is most people my age, we're like the tail end of it. We've got a handful of young kids coming in, but it's I don't know, I call it the white boot crowd. they're coming in now and they think it's, oh, it's cool. Look at me and blah, 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 blah. But what's happened now is they can't afford to live here anymore. The whole Cape is like that, and Massachusetts, it's probably elsewhere too. But I'm seeing a lot of that right now. And the only thing we have left, I retired from lobstering after many, many years, is our shellfish farm, which we've had for 35 years. And I introduced oysters here, oh God, back in early 2000s. Nobody ever done it, and I've done doing well. Can't get help. Nobody's really interested in it. You know, we know how good it is for the environment. You can preach it over and over again, but preaching it to people that really don't care, that are here, they really don't care. And I go to meetings like you've never seen, and I just, you know, you get burnout on it after a while. So I'm the old adage was like my father told me, you're either at the table or you're on the table. Well, guess what? You know, it's after a while it gets tiring. I mean, I keep fighting it and all that to try to survive more than anything else. But I'm doing my own part here. My farm, my shellfish farm. Now I have a wild fishery on my farm due to what I was doing with recycled shells. I use recycled bags. I recycle everything just about except the shellfish tags. So I'm pretty doggone good. And I've actually now it's been proven that my farm actually is now supplying seed shellfish to the recreational areas now. And, you know, I get a few people, oh, isn't that so nice? But it's an uphill battle. But I don't know. I'm just very intrigued with all this thing. I like hearing, you know, guys like myself that are up there in age talking about it, but I want to hear the younger people too. I want to hear West Coast, East Coast. You know, I'm learning, relearning again. The day you stop learning, you might as well just hang it up. So hopefully you guys can hear me, and I appreciate you letting me talk. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. Yes, it's so great to have everybody. And I know that we're about to lose Linda because she's got to drop off at the hour here. So I just wanted to give her a moment to tell us anything else if she would like.
It looks like I can stay on a little bit longer. So maybe I could just respond quickly to Alex to say, I hear you. That's certainly a problem we're facing all around the country. There are some working waterfront bills that have been introduced in Congress, and I just hear more of a conversation around recognizing that impact, that gentrification, and what we do to maintain working waterfront. So I think it's really important to keep bringing that up. And then certainly also in Alaska, there's a huge investment right now in trying to advance mariculture. So oyster seaweed farming, recognizing that it can have really positive benefits for the ocean and also for coastal communities, for fishermen that want to diversify, as long as it's done in a way that it stays small scale, that it respects existing practices of subsistence and community dependence on areas. So yeah, I hear you. Those aren't solutions, but they are places where I see some traction as a result of hearing the kind of concerns that you're raising, and maybe a place to keep an eye on, and with that legislation, and make sure that your representatives, congressmen, know that working waterfront protections and zoning and maintaining access for young fishermen and the infrastructure we need to support fishing and mariculture is really important.
If I might say something here on that too, to add, we're also right where we are right now. We're right in the middle of the critical whale habitat, the right whale thing. And unfortunately, as the other fellow was talking before, a lobsterman, he knows all about that stuff too, what we were going through down here. And we're fighting NOAA, we're fighting coastal studies, we're under, we're constantly getting sued and all this and that. That was probably the other reason too why I retired from it too. But it's just something to think about. They have the ear of the government. They don't have our ear, and our representatives and senators. You know where that's going. It goes where the follow the money. It goes to, I hate to be that way, but you've got to follow the money and the lobbyists and all that. And quite honestly, you know, our associations are doing the best they can, and we are doing the best we can, but it really is an uphill battle. Thanks for letting me interrupt.
I would just add to those comments that this is a really good example of the more complete story that decision makers need to hear. Climate change is far from the only thing that is compromising our ocean food producers. It's market collapses, it's waterfront gentrification, it's the unintended consequences of catch shares, right? And so
Mm.
any kind of climate discussion has to happen, I think, parallel to market innovation and possibly catch share reform places, things that improve access, but also just the viability of these communities that are being kind of shot at from a few different angles.
Thank you.
Thank you. James Moore, let's hear from you.
Thank you. I really appreciate Linda and Hannah being involved at the level that they are, you know, a seat at the big table. It's so important that that there be an inclusiveness of all the sectors, you know, and especially the working waterfront, the fishermen who spend their entire lives out in the ocean, who are trained observers, whose success depend on their being able to understand some of the dynamics of what the world they're working in, and so it was. You know, I want to understand things. I don't spout opinions about stuff unless I feel like I have kind of an understanding of it. And in the world today, there's so many factions, and everybody's got an opinion with a person. Well, you know, the person is attached to the opinion. You know, it's a lot of confusion. And so I felt like one way that we might address that is to provide necessary data to increase the depth and the extent of the data that's involved in so many of the decisions, you know. And so that's why we launched this this program. You know, there's an example of what can go wrong if the producers, I mean, we're a food producing industry, a critical infrastructure, really. If the producers are not included in the decisions being made, you know, the models and all this are firing off all sorts of scenarios and stuff like that. But if we don't feel like we're included, what can happen is what you see in Europe with the farmers, where there's millions of farmers all over Europe, you know, Germany and Netherlands and Spain and Italy and Portugal and literally millions, hundreds of thousands of tractors, people pushing back against their sense of not being included. I mean, they're fighting for their survival. Decisions are being met to you know, like happened recently in Germany, that they decided to cancel their fuel subsidy in order to send more money to the war in Ukraine. But they've had enough. I've talked to German farmers who are required by law to set aside whole swaths of productive farmland for the insects, and they're perplexed. What insects? They asked what insects, and nobody seemed to know. So I've been really encouraged by, on the other hand, you know, by connecting with people, you know, like at Woods Hole back there, you know, pretty close to where Alex is there, and finding that for the last 15, 20 years, there's been this collaborative work going on, these shelf research projects involving Glenn Guarkowitz and James Manning and some of these people back there, where fishermen are producing very, very valuable data information so that things could be understood, the models can be understood. And that's where I feel like I can make a difference. And I think that's what can bring people together, you know. I'm coming from a position of being, I'm not sold on any of it, but I know I can provide valuable data, and I can, it's an opportunity for us to get together on the same page and at the table. If we position ourselves as a fishing industry, we're the guys that are out there all the time. If we can be providing critically important data that's necessary, we have a place at the table. That assures us a place at the table. And the future of management seems to be an ecosystem-based management. And I think it's a great idea, but we've seen what happens when the data is too thin and there's not a broad enough understanding of what's going on. As decisions that are made that are over precautionary cost us a lot. The closer to real-time data that these modelers have, I think the better, or the managers have, the better the management. We, you know, models are very twitchy, and they're only as good as the data that feeds them. And if the data is too thin, then we've got some real problems. That's where we can make a difference, and that's where we can all get together.
Linda and Hannah, would you like to speak to that?
Just to say, yes, that's, I mean, I think it's important. It's great work you're doing. We are all working to try and get USDA, who's where, you know, farm bills and all the help for farmers lives in this country, to recognize that fish is food and to start to provide more support to fishermen as well for some of the similar programs, similar work that needs to happen. But yeah, certainly agree that generating data, being part of generating that data, making sure it's getting to the right people is a pretty critical role that our, you know, our fishermen who are out there all the time can play in addressing climate change, identifying research, and moving forward solutions.
I think Linda captured my thoughts too.
And it looks like I might need to go for a panel here. Hang on 1 minute. If I duck out, thanks so much for the opportunity to be here. I think they're calling for me.
Thanks, Linda. I want to call on Jesse. I know you haven't been able to do the raise your hand feature, but I know you've wanted to ask a question for a while.
Thanks. Yeah. Where do I begin? To bounce off James and Alex and what we're seeing, I liken what we are as a big ball of bait fish, where we have the birds diving from the top and dolphins from underneath, you're fishing sharks. There's so much on our plate, whether it be the data, as James was just saying. If everyone's listened to the last couple of Freakonomics radio episodes, they're talking about hoarding data, pay-to-play journals. The biggest thing I think for data transparency is we need to advocate for open platform data, which has not been available. And even the biases that are seen by thought scientists, but they got into a field for a certain reason, and there's biases that they don't even realize that are happening that have been found in lots and lots of data. If you go back and listen to these Freakonomic episodes, it's very interesting what that touches upon. So advocating for open platform data is very, very important, and it lets us know that what we're saying is getting into the mix of the stream of what's happening, because we are out there 365 days a year, but from things like ropeless gear that we're facing here for the whales, to the windmills, to last summer, it rained every day. We had so much fresh water coming out of the rivers. It was creating algae blooms, and it was pushing the lobsters out. So all the in-river and inshore fishermen had a horrible summer. So we are seeing this happen. And of course, we are in a multi-decadal oscillation in the upward trend since 1996. So we may see in about 75 years, when it tends to go the other way. Hopefully we'll see some decrease there in temperatures. But with that said, that we are so busy processing everything that we're fighting for and against and advocating for, the big way to cut our carbon footprint in the fishing industry is the people after it leaves us. You know, the export import for seafood is ridiculous. We have so much seafood right here in New England that wouldn't even have to leave New England. And you know, I do the salmon thing in Bristol Bay and the scallop thing and the lobster thing, and all I can say is right now we're getting $11 a pound for our lobsters. The biggest attribution to that is our domestic market. We are so ultra focused on our domestic market that it is creating an opportunity for us to see these prices. And you're seeing Russia flood the market with cheap cod, with cheap crab, which is decimating the Alaskan fisheries, is a big part of that. And a way we can mitigate some of this is to eliminate the shipping of the seafood overseas back and forth, to be pushing our sockeye salmon to the major markets. You know, here in Maine, I always go to the seafood case and I look at the sockeye, and it looks like it got stomped on by elephants. And you know, it saddens me as a Bristol Bay salmon fisherman to see that. And if we have marketing here, see, here on the East Coast, people are happy to get a salmon. They don't care if it's an Atlantic salmon. They don't even call it anything but a salmon. If I were to do that in Seattle and say, hey, have a farmed Atlantic salmon, they would laugh at me. So we need to get the East Coast as up to par with education with the quality of the seafoods that we are producing right here in the United States, and to get that consumer market going in a way that we haven't seen before. And I think just by doing that, you are going to see increases in the dock price on our products. You're going to see a market decrease in the carbon footprint. And then I will go further by saying, as organizations want to become climate friendly for us as fishermen, make it as easy for us as possible. And a great way to do that is by going to Hamilton Jet, by going to Twin Disc, by going to the boat manufacturers, because they're the ones that are going to be making us more efficient. Our reduction gears become more and more efficient, and our fuel usage, the engines. Now, if we had products that we could purchase, only half thinking about the climate positives in the purchase, because the manufacturers have done that thinking for us, and you give it to us at a price that we can afford, that's going to be an advantage by going to companies like Twin Disc and Hamilton Jet and these manufacturers, because that's where it's going to come right to us with all the work already having been done. That said, you know, the efficiency of climate friendly motors and that kind of thing, right now we're lobstering at 40, 50 miles out to sea in the wintertime. So it's going to have to, you know, we're going to have to be able to sustain such things, or Bristol Bay, where once we launch, we're in the water for 2 months. So I think the best way to get to point A to Z is to get that efficiency down with the manufacturers. The working waterfront situation is horrible here in Maine. Only 2 out of 5 Maine high school graduates will be able to live here in Maine. Every single county, whether it's up in the mountains or here on the coast, is unattainable for median income. Even if you're a young family, young fishing family, and you get a loan, it's just going to be outbid by cash buyers. And that's a huge thing. We have lobster captain, boat owner, permit holders that drive from Lewiston, Maine to get to the coast because they've lost or can't get coastal properties. A great way to help preserve the working waterfront is to get involved with your local government, whether it be a board of selectmen, some of these boards, because here's what's happening. As our culture is shifting on the coastal Maine, we're having these people come in and they don't want to hear lobster boats at 4 o'clock in the morning. They want boardwalks, they want condos, and they're getting on these boards and committees in the towns, and they're creating votes to make it go that direction. So if in our coastal communities, we get together and create ordinances that working waterfront, the designated areas must remain that way no matter what, that's where you're going to get an advantage of preserving this. As far as the young fishermen go, I mean, we can't even get a deckhand. The guy on my boat, he drives an hour and a half from Winthrop down to Booth Bay every day. You couldn't fire someone who doesn't show up because you're not going to be able to replace them. So it's not just the boat owners, it's the blue collar deckhands that's becoming a crisis because they're being priced out. You'll hear people say, oh, no one wants to work anymore. There's no waitresses, there's no waiters. Well, someone still has to dig the ditches in your community. And if we price out all of the help, then you're going to be single operator owner boatman because there's no one that can help. So yeah, there's so many challenges that we're facing, and it's like throwing spaghetti against the wall. Or what email do I have to open up next? I have to put a VMS in my boat now. I have to take observers. No, I have to pay for observers. There's all these things that just mounts up to making it hard to listen to one cause, and this being making our way of fishing more efficient and more green. Which it doesn't matter. No one's a science denier. We all want our children to breathe cleaner air and to have fish to fish for when we're long gone. I think we're not science deniers, we're science demanders. We don't want extrapolation on minimal numbers and to tell us that these right whales need 9,000 square miles when you can put sounders on, you can put tags on, and all these different things. It's the funding. We don't need to eliminate the science we have. We need to overfund it. We need more funding so we can actually do flyovers like the Dungeness crab in the Southern District for San Francisco region, where you have flyovers and you say, okay, well, there's whales, you pull your gear, they're gone. Okay, put it back. We need more real-time science, not extrapolations that came from 2016, where you told us there's 780 right whales and there's a gap in science, and all of a sudden 2020 comes and now there's only 350 right whales, and it's only because, well, we used a different metric. Baloney. Or the denial that 100-something whales washing up on the East Coast didn't have anything to do with turbines, and now there's too many witnesses. Now they're admitting to it. BOEM just put out a thing about the right whales and their migration pattern. So we have to really be on top of all of this, and the easiest way to do that is to make it easy for us to digest. And I know I went on for a while, but thank you.
No, thanks, Jesse. I mean, I think you're speaking to a lot of, even though there are specific things in our specific fisheries, there's a lot of things that bi-coastally we can definitely agree on. I want to say real quickly, we're quarter past the hour here, so if you have to hop off, no problem. Thank you for joining us. I know that Sarah and I believe Hannah, as long as she can, are going to stick around to continue this conversation. Also, if you want to drop some resources in the chat, folks are bringing up these initiatives and these organizations and these podcasts. Feel free to do so. I mean, we're all here to learn from each other. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and keep going with Robert. I believe you were next.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm from Boston, Massachusetts. Land-based career, all fish, many years. So I just kind of got a little bit of questions, and maybe there'll be some thought-provoking, or maybe there'll be some suggestions, but how can we get and then utilize marine science to help us forecast the future harvest potentials? Because the lower salinity is coming. It's going to affect a lot of the marine species, but how is it going to affect them? What's going to happen? Some species are going to win, some are going to lose. How do we get a forecast? Most of the scientists will tell you what happened in the past. How do we get science to tell us what's going to happen in the future? How do we challenge the scientists? What will be the mechanism to do that so that we can guide the future fishing efforts for what will be caught, and then, gear up the marketing and whether it's restaurants or retailers, to get prepared to sell these types of products, whatever they may be. Maybe some will be the same, maybe some will be different. So in Boston, a few of us have an idea to create, the Boston Marine and Aquaculture Science Center. And the question would be how do we identify the collaborators that will be needed for a project like that? How do we get scientists working? How do we get, marine biology students working? How do we get fishermen interacting? How do we get an aquaculture segment into it? How do we get the medical, people involved with what is the medicine in the food? Because if you look at, the people that are focused on, let's say, the ocean utilization to 100%, well, in the bones or the scales of fish is products that can be used for human health, that sort of thing. Well, how do we find, that bread basket of opportunities? How do we present it to the people in the community so young entrepreneurs can, run with it and find ways? If we're going to have less fish in the future, wild fish, aquaculture may be great, but it may not be able to support what's lost. Well, what ways can we make better benefit out of things? And one of the things that, I think has already been mentioned is commercial boats, docking capacity. How do we create that? And, how do you zone, harbors? It's very challenging because money talks and fishermen usually lose, except for the scallopers in the Bedford, Mass. They seem to win, but they are constantly fighting as well. So I don't know how that was for a question, but that's it, what you have. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I'm not a scientist, but I think you're asking a really good question about forecasts. And I think several people here have brought up really critical pieces of that kind of vision for the future of being able to forecast more. I think, as James was talking about having, using our fishing fleets to collect data in a meaningful and consistent way, I think that is critical. Applying the technology that humanity already has to fisheries, we have not come close to the technology innovation that I think is available to us. I think partly because we're stuck in a little bit of a rigid regulatory structure, but that kind of innovation. And then just the open source concept that Jesse was talking about, I think I'm amazed at the amount of FOIAs my colleagues have to do to get raw data that really should be public information. I think we need more eyes from different types of institutions, different sectors, able to look at and use the critical data we're collecting from the ocean. And I think then we'll start to see innovation. But we need that openness and to kind of unstick ourselves from the current era we're in. But you asked a lot of other really good questions too, Robert, and I think we'll continue to chew on those.
Thanks for that response, Hannah. And that's why it's so great that we've got some scientists joining us so they can hear what fishermen are questioning. And, going off of what James had said earlier with that data, sharing it with scientists, open source, that's how science can give back to those communities and the data that they've given them. We're going to move on with, I think I've got Amy up next.
Hi, thank you. I'm Amy Grondin. Once again, I'm a salmon troller from live in Port Townsend, Washington, and work Washington coast and Southeast Alaska. Before I go to my comment, Robert, you raised some really great points. And one of the things I think we need are, in addition to marine scientists, we need marine economists and social workers and all these other things involved in this problem solution, because we're doing everything we can with trying to manage our fish and manage our fishermen, but we're not getting any solutions that are like saving our tails. Like, we can see the challenges coming down the pike. Like you said, how do we project those things? But also, based on that, I think it's not just the fishermen that we're talking with here. I think it's anybody who produces food or has a business of a certain size is really, really being challenged with a lot of the same issues. Like you said, finding deckhands, finding dishwashers, finding waiters who will stay, finding, if you're a processor, finding just people to work your line. And the challenge with finding affordable housing is something, and gentrification, that's got to stop, because it's really not working, and we're spiraling down hard on that one. So what I had wanted to comment on, and all of this really goes together, I mean, I wish we had more time to talk, is that climate change and efficiencies aren't necessarily the answer, just because if you look at, climate change, if we look at efficiencies, we can probably figure out some things that would be really great, but it's not just the people on the water who need to do them. It's like, if we look at the people who are buying our fish, if people took the effort to do the efficiencies to keep their house tight and limit their light, using their energy and all of those things, we could reduce a lot of climate change that way, when we're already trying everything we can on the water to make ourselves more efficient. So like, we need to, I think, encourage people outside of our industry to also become efficient, rather than just looking at us and saying, you folks are the problem, we're overfishing, and look at the causes of climate change. I'm a little babbly here right now because I'm trying to do this quickly. To switch gears quickly, what I really wanted to say was, one of the challenges I see, once again, are that when we're on the water as commercial fishermen, we are encouraged to be sustainable, to limit our bycatch, to get our target species and all those things, and just reduce waste as much as we can. But once that fish hits the dock and becomes marketed instead of management, there is so much waste that goes on in our food industry, not just for fish, but also for all the other food that, like I said, food producers produce. And so much of it gets thrown away, and there's certain accepted percentages that you just know you're going to lose. And how do we tighten that up and stop that kind of waste? Because part of the reason I direct market my own catches, one, because I could get more money from it, and two, I know where my fish is going, and I can control the amount of fish that becomes wastage or goes bad, and I'm proud to say very little of it ever goes bad, because it has a home when it comes off my boat. Or if it doesn't, I have a good idea about how I can market it to different restaurants and people that I work with. So someone mentioned aquaculture. That's not a solution. Aquaculture is not a solution to the problem with fish. It's just it's a Band-Aid to find out how to get more fish into the market, but it doesn't look at the problems that are causing declines in our seafood supplies. It just is like, I think I'm singing to the choir here, but like, it really isn't a solution. And I don't know why people think it is. And I'm all for oysters and seaweed and all of those things, but finfish are challenging. Just something that, yeah, we need to figure out a better way to do. So, and I should probably just stop there, but yeah, I think we need to work more closely with the people of in other food industries that are also facing the same challenges, whether they're a small scale farmer or a small scale grocery or any of those things. Thank you.
Thanks, Amy. Yeah, and for bringing up that important point about waste and working with our processors and buyers in that way too. I've got Alan up next.
Yeah, I finally figured out that I had not clicked OK on the meeting being recorded, and that was why I couldn't unmute or get off video. So I'm an albacore fisherman. Albacore trips tend to be long. Refrigeration's going the whole time. There are a lot of power requirements there. And I have a sailboat, and it lets me pull the throttle back when the wind's favorable. And but I'm running 1943 running gear. I got a 1943 low block 671 and a twin disc crash box transmission. So it's kind of a paradox, trying to do my bit, but I'm using antiquated, completely identified as being the worst possible thing for the climate is what I'm having to run, because I don't have the money to go out and get an engine, and I don't particularly want an engine that's going to shut down when I'm in the harbor entrance because I didn't change the oil and drift onto the breakwater, because I don't want an electronic engine. I want an engine that's economical and doesn't pollute, but I don't want one that's not suited to a marine environment, which is what they're trying to push on me. But my point about albacore is that we're always going to need diesel. You're never going to be able to carry enough batteries to, successfully stay out 2 weeks, or some guys are out for months. And diesel is threatened. I'm in California, and you can see it's coming. It's going to be harder and harder to get diesel, and the price is going to go up and up. Diesel costs $1 more a gallon here than gasoline, and as the Air Pollution Control Board continues to clamp down on everything, it's eventually going to be a problem. I think boats and airplanes are always going to need diesel, and we have to think in the long run about keeping diesel available. You know, we have to start prodding them right now to say, well, if you want to have this seafood, you're going to have to at least keep some kind of a way for diesel to get to us. Now, there were a number of other things people said that I was really interested in, but there was one guy was talking about the amount of seafood that's imported in this country. And I have to say, from my experience, I made my first albacore trip as a deckhand in 1974. And I remember the guy I was working for talking about when they passed the law that said all fish has to be sold in the United States that's canned has to be federally inspected. And then it's just like flipping a switch on a light. All the canneries went overseas. And the albacore fishermen, now we sell our fish, they get put on a freighter, they go to Vietnam, or Ecuador, or American Samoa, they get put in a can, and then they get pushed back across the Pacific to get sold in the store. And it just seems really unfortunate. And I don't like to be arguing for protection, but all these foreign products, the majority of them are fished in a bad way. You know, the Chinese have, you know, they complain that they need to feed their people, but what they're doing with all the albacore that they're catching is flooding the market. You know, they aren't eating in China necessarily. They're selling it to Spain, our old market, and stuff like that. So we do need to be talking about a little bit of protection here for American fishermen. If 90% of the fish are being imported, it just seems like it might be appropriate, and that's it.
Thanks, Alan. James, back to you.
Lots of stimulating ideas here. I don't know how to respond. You know, my son's an albacore fisherman too, and loves it. There are some problems with you know, the markets and stuff like that, and the you know, other countries, and I was just at a meeting with Senator Sullivan, and he announced just, you know, several days ago that he had successfully gotten that Russian seafood that was processed in Canada had been funneled into the United States, all over the United States, East Coast too, and it hurt and damaged the markets. And he had mentioned that he was successful in getting that taken care of, and I appreciated that. I was a little concerned at the same time that you know, I hate for our short-term solutions to be based on economic warfare. I think that we need to work toward, you know, expanding our markets and the expansion of the global South, you know, in bringing those people out of poverty into the position where they can purchase seafood. You know, that there's a tremendous market to be thinking about there. But getting back to the open source platform comments, yeah, we're collecting data, and we have a backend data manager is Ocean Data Network. I think they're based out of Maine. Cooper Van Behnken and Jack Carroll and Carlos, you know, a guy over in Spain. And I've been working on a pilot project with them with using the Moana sensors to generate temperature at depth. And it's an automatic system that they've deployed in our. We're hoping to get it out to as many boats as possible, maybe 30 boats. We've got another grant in the works with National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, and we'll know soon. But the amount, I've been doing this for 3 years, and every single time I pull a line, there is all the data on the temperature and depth where I've fished for the last 3 years. It's a huge amount of data, and this is open source stuff. And they use very sophisticated international networks where everything that we desire to be shared open source gets out to the world through this ERDAP and fair practices, and the CEO of this company, Cooper, was awarded some prestigious ocean innovation award by Economist magazine. We presented a poster at the International Council for the Exploration of the Sea in Bilbao, Spain last fall. And what that poster was about, it had participants from different nations, but Cooper and this group et al. Are developing this fishing vessel ocean observing network, and it's international, and it's growing, and it's providing this kind of data there's a lot of ocean data that's available through their Argo program, and the deep ocean and the satellite stuff is very good, but in the coastal regions where there's the most dynamics, and most economically important to the coastal communities, there's very sparse data, and the fishing vessels, our fishing operations, not by coincidence, I think it's providence. These are the areas that we live and work in. And so we have the opportunity, and it's happening fast, to fill those gaps. And it's really exciting to be a part of that.
Thanks, James. I think we all really appreciate your language of using the word opportunity, and that's what we can all look forward to this as. I want to bring it back to Sarah and Hannah real quick, just circling back here and see how we'd like to wrap up this awesome session.
I'll just say that thank you everyone for showing up. James, I love ending on that note, very hopeful for the future, but what we can do and why we're here. And I really appreciate all your guys' time today.
Yeah, I'm really encouraged by the amount of dialogue, and we identified a lot of challenges, but just as many solutions, and that was really encouraging. And I hope we can continue to have these dialogues and maybe even go beyond dialogue and really start working together. I love the sticker, Alex. Yeah, so we will try to have some more webinars like this spring. Kinsey and I have had our heads down working really hard the last few months on trying to process all of the interview data that I and Kinsey and about 3 other fishermen researchers collected over the past year. A number of you are familiar with this because you participated in an interview. I see Alex, Alan, Eric, Jennifer, Amy, and Jeff all participated in that interview project. And there were about 130 other fishermen coast to coast who did as well, which is why it's taken us a long time to get through all of that data. But we're hoping to ramp up sort of an effort based on all that information, along with the policy analysis that our colleague Roses at Roger Williams University Law School has been doing to sort of understand where the possible levers that the fishing industry could collectively try to pull to get more state and federal dollars available to support our industry, so that any sort of investments in fleet efficiency or alternative fuels don't have to come out of our pocket, since we all know we are not in a position to self-fund our energy transition. And since the government has stepped up to make sure that everyone has the financial support they need to be greener, we need to be on that list as well. So we'll hopefully get more information to you out about how you all can be part of that effort as it moves forward this spring. And I look forward to seeing you all again soon. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks.
This was amazing. Thank you so much for putting together a eclectic group of participants. Thank you.
Great conversation. Thank you, everyone, for all you do.
Thank you very much.